All right, hey everyone. Today we are going to go over how to create a player inventory menu. So if we go back to our project, right now we've been working in this scene called door test, and I'm going to recommend that we just go ahead and save this as a new scene. Um, so let's say you're working on GitHub and you decide to make a new branch, right? Like is probably a good idea. Just to make sure that your scenes aren't gonna get conflicts. I like to do all of my development for new features in new scenes that are just copies of the current test scenes. So this one I'm gonna call inventory menu. We could even call it an inventory menu test, and I will save my new scene, and it's just a copy of this. Another reason why I want a new scene is as we test our menu, I'm actually going to want to disable my player character so that as I look around, move the mouse, I'm going to be moving the mouse to sort of test menu buttons and scroll bars. I don't want the camera going crazy moving along with my mouse cursor. So eventually we'll set it up so that they play nice together, but that's not going to come till later. So for now that we have this new scene, I'm just going to disable the rigid body FPS game object here. So if you were to run the game now, it might tell you there's a warning, warning, no cameras are rendering, and there's a way to turn that off, and evidently I have because I'm not getting that error. And I don't remember where you turn that off, unfortunately. I feel like maybe it's in one of these menus, but you might just have to Google it if you're getting giant text that says warning, no cameras rendering. Google how to turn that off because I don't see it just obviously right in front of me, but I clearly it can be turned off because I've turned it off, and you're going to want to turn it off because it's irritating to work with that big message in the middle of the camera. All right, so I actually also noticed we have our reticle, our targeting crosshair thing here. I'm going to turn that off too so we don't have to worry about seeing it. So it looks like maybe we can just turn this whole canvas off actually, and we'll make a new one for our menu. So why don't I rename this canvas since we're going to have a couple now. I'm going to rename this one HUD canvas or heads up display, right? This is part of my first person character's heads up display, right? The text that shows up when I look at an interactive object in the crosshair. And I'm going to just disable that game object so I am just looking at a black screen when I run the game. And that'll give us a good test bed for our menu. All right. So actually I was monkeying around with it and I figured out if you right click on the game tab, that's where you can unselect the warn if no camera is rendering. So yours might look like this. You're going to want to right click here and uncheck that. And then in the warning will go away. And that will make it easier to see our UI as we work. Okay, so first off, I think we need to revisit our inventory object script. And, well, actually, before even this, I think we should take a look at the mock-up of our inventory menu. Let me grab that real quick. It's in our design doc here. So I'm going to scroll down and find this menu. This is basically what we're going to be making. And I'm just looking at it because, essentially we can assume we're a programmer and a designer handed us this document and our job is to make this thing. So we need to read it over and make sure we understand what we're making first. That's step one, right? So the gist of it as I take a look is all of the items, all the menu objects, they need to have a description, and these are meant to be icons, so they all need icons as well. So everything that could ever be added to your inventory is going to need an icon and a description text. So that's why if we go back to our inventory objects script, this script is basically our data model for things that go in the inventory menu. So you can see we thought of this earlier, that we need to add a long description field and an icon field. And remember the to-do thing? You can view that in your task list here. So anytime you make a to-do comment, if you go to view task list, you can find them, and then if you double click it, it'll take you to them. So this was on our agenda, and it makes sense because if I look at our design, it calls for icons. They've all got icons and they've all got text. So let's add a text and icons to all of our inventory objects. I think we should make these serialized fields because that will make it easier for the designer to sort of use this one inventory object script as like to reuse it for all kinds of different inventory objects that they can set up in the editor. So the description text is just going to be a string, a serialized field, private string. And let's go ahead and just name it description. And then the image, the icon, I think we want to make this, I think this is going to be something of the type sprite. Because all of our, we could either make it a texture 2D or a sprite. Either one is really going to work. But I'm going to use sprite. So private string, or I'm sorry, sprite. And I'm going to call this icon. So this will be the icon that shows up on our menu for this particular inventory object. And this is the description text. So I've done these to-dos so I can get rid of them now. I guess I can add tooltips. That's probably a good idea. So tooltip, and so this is for the description. I'm going to say this is the text that will display when the player selects this object in the inventory menu. And for the icon, let's give that a tooltip as well. And we'll say this is icon to display when, or how about this, for this item in the inventory menu. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. So when you open the menu, you will see this icon representing this object. And when you select the object, it'll tell you this description. Now, if we save here and go back to the editor, and go back to our scene view so it's not just a black screen here, I should have this key that I made previously. This is an inventory object, and I made the key for this locked door, if we remember how that's all set up. So when you grab the key, you can open the door. Won't work now because I turned my player off and I just have this black screen. But what I'm getting at is I want us to click on one of our inventory objects so we can see these new fields. And so if I look at this menu, there's kind of a decent amount of text that could show up here. Like this could be a note, for example. So rather than using the key as our test inventory object, I'm going to actually make a new thing and I'm just going to make it a note. So maybe I'll just duplicate the key and I'm going to change its name to note. And you can think of this as like if you've ever played a Resident Evil game, or many games have notes in them where you pick them up, they get added to your inventory and it sort of tells you about something that happened in the world. It's going to be a good device for us to use to tell story in this kind of a game. And so its name will be a note. And then here's where we would actually type the contents of the note. Like dear sir, blah, 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 blah. But you can see this is going to be a pretty frustrating interface for typing in a long description. So there's a way we can fix that in our serialized field settings here. That's the icon. We're dealing with the description here. So there's another attribute. These things inside the square brackets, like tooltip and serialized field, these are called attributes. And there's another attribute we can give to this that will make it easier to deal with for typing a longer text description, and that's called text area. And the text area attribute will just make it so that you have a certain minimum number of lines that you can see when you're editing the text. So for example, I'm going to say the minimum number of string or lines will be 3 and the max will be 8. I don't know, I'm just making that up. We'll see what it looks like. And so if I save this, you will see now, once it compiles, we should see a little bit different of an interface here. There we go. So it's longer, right? So I can say something like, dear sir, we have received your, I don't know, tax letter in the mail, blah, blah, blah. And you can see as I keep adding lines, eventually once I get past the 8th line, there's a scroll bar that appears. So there'll always be at least 3 lines showing here, and once we get to 8, it'll start scrolling. So that's what the 3 to 8 thing means. Anyway, I don't know. There we go. There's our note. Alright, so text area is a super useful attribute when you're trying to set something up like this for designers to be able to type longer text into the editor. Otherwise, they're stuck trying to type a long thing into this, and it's just difficult to manage, difficult to see what it actually all looks like. And if you happen to notice there's like a typo, to go back and find that and then fix it can be a nuisance. So whenever you want longer text, definitely use the text area attribute. It's also, I think you can read more about it in the notes here. Yeah. All right. So we got our text area. How about this icon? How's that going to work? So I guess step 1 is we need to find an icon that would work for notes. Actually, I'm going to change the color of my note versus my key here just to make things a little more clear. So in my Pro Builder stuff, let's just go ahead and find the vertex colors. We just make it blue or something, whatever, that's fine. Alright, so anyway, we need an icon for the note. The icon will sort of appear here if this was the note, or if this was the note and we clicked it and it shows up the description here. So we need an icon. So what I'm going to do, I'm on Bing search actually, because if you search on Bing you can set up like a rewards account and get free junk. But the same thing will work on Google. But anyway, I'm just going to search for note icon and go to images. I want to show you something interesting. We can actually set the license type as part of our search criteria here. And so I can find a note icon that is totally free for me to use. And I ideally will find one that has like a transparent background. Well, I don't know if that's true or not. I guess it doesn't matter so much, but transparent background might be useful. I don't know if these actually have transparent backgrounds and you just can't tell on Bing, or if they're not transparent. So I guess we can just download one and find out. So I don't know, how about this one? This one's kind of cool, I guess. So I'll go ahead and download this note icon, and we will look at it and see if it has a transparent background. I'm going to rename this thing something easier to deal with. I must already have one. Let's get a new one. All right. I'm just going to open it in Photoshop real quick. So now that this is in Photoshop, I can see it. Yes, it does have a transparent background. That's what this little checker pattern means, and I think that's probably a good thing. So in other words, I think this image will work for me. What I want to do is remember where I got it from. So this way I can credit whoever made it. So what I'm going to do is either copy this or maybe go to the website where it is and then copy this, and I'm going to put it here so that I can remember where this thing came from and attribute them in my credits that I make later in my game. So you need to make sure you remember to keep track of where you're getting stuff and credit whomever made the thing. And I'm basically trusting Bing in that this is indeed a license, royalty-free to share and use thing. But you might want to do a little better due diligence on your own, especially if it's a commercial project. All right, anyway, so I've got this thing downloaded. I need to add it to my project somewhere. So this is going to be a new category of asset that we haven't added yet. And so I'm going to go ahead and make a new folder called Sprites. And so I'm going to open this up. And remember, sprites are just sort of like 2D artwork that is not meant to be like a texture or a material that's wrapped around a model. It's meant to just show up on its own, like in a menu or in a 2D game. Anyway, so I need to copy that note icon into my sprites folder. And when you click it, we need to make sure that since this is a 3D game, Unity actually is going to, by default, think that it is meant to be a texture or some type of file that would be normally used in a 3D game, but actually we want it to be a sprite. So way back when you first made your project, you had the choice of creating a 3D or a 2D project. And I made a 3D project, and that's why the default is going to be, like a texture. But if you had made a 2D project, like maybe you've done in the past, all of your image assets come in automatically as sprites, so you never had to do this before. But now that we're in 3D, since this is meant to be a UI image, we need to make sure that we manually change the import settings to sprite in 2D and UI. And then you have to hit apply. And so once I've done that, you could see like if I can actually drag this thing. Oh, I actually applied it to that model. I can just drag this thing into the world here, and I've got like a giant picture of a note. That's not what I want, but I just wanted to demonstrate that you could do that. Now, it looks like when I drag that onto this plane, it actually made it a material, and I don't want that, so I'm going to delete this because that was not intentional. Alright, so now if I click on my note I've made here, which has the inventory object script, I can actually plug in my icon, which needs to be of the type sprite. So I can drag this over and put it in there. Now, I have this key. I'm going to have to one day give this a description like key to the, I don't know, seller. I'm not sure. Whatever you want, I could call it the seller key. And then I would have to find an icon of a key and put that in here too. So this is how we're going to make all of our inventory objects, by giving them all descriptions and icons. But for now, I'm just going to focus on this note. We've got the icon, we got the description text, so we are doing well with the note. Alright, so now that we've sort of got the structure of a of an inventory object itself set up, let's take another look at our mockup. Now, if I were, I don't know, if I was working on a real project, quote unquote, and there was a real artist or graphic designer making me these mockups, I would probably ask for the images in the exact resolution that they're meant to appear in the game. And I would probably actually even load this image into Unity and then sort of like build exactly what it is, right? In this case, these are clearly not these aren't like actual size. Our menu is going to need to be bigger than this. So we're just going to kind of like approximate it. And you can see the designer did give us some percentages that we can look at. So it says the menu is going to take up 50% of the width of the screen and 80% of the height. So at this point, we're going to start building this in Unity. And so I'm going to make a whole new canvas for it. So I'm going to save. One thing to keep in mind, the Unity UI system, it works well, but it can be a little finicky, and I'm sure I'll run into some example as we go. But it's going to be a very good idea to save often and make lots of commits as soon as we make commits to our repository once we make what we consider like effective progress. Anyhow, so I'm going to make a new canvas. So I just right-clicked an empty area here. I'm going to go to UI, and I'm going to choose Canvas. And canvases are just sort of what all of your UI in Unity has to live in. And remember, the canvas by default is bound to screen space. So it's mapped to like my computer's monitor as opposed to like something in the world space. Like, for instance, this door is in world space, but then you can kind of see, I'm going to turn the grid off here so it's not in the way. See that towering white outline of a rectangle? That is my screen space, and it's just a totally different coordinate system. So it's it's because our screens are 2D flat surfaces. I'm going to work on this thing in the 2D mode here. So I selected 2D here, and I just double clicked the canvas, or in the game window you could hit F for focus, and now I have a nice view of my canvas, right? So this is my whole screen. Before I forget, I guess I should go ahead and rename this. I suppose I'm going to call it inventory canvas. And another thing I always think is important to do when you first get started with UI, of like once you've made the canvas, you need to figure out how you're going to deal with what happens when the screen changes sizes or shapes, right? So for me personally, because, well, basically what will happen is if someone changes, like if they play on a different, maybe they have a 4:3 monitor, it's unlikely, but you'll see like that actually changes the shape of the canvas. So my menu how's it going to react to that change? Is it going to stretch out? Is it going to stay exactly the same? It's something we have to figure out at the beginning, or it's going to make life more difficult later. Personally, what I like to do is design all of my UI for 16:9, which is just a normal TV screen aspect ratio, and say that's what my game supports. And if you have a weird monitor, you'll have letterboxing, right? Like the black bars on either the top and bottom or the left and right. And that makes it really easy to scale the same UI design across lots of different screen types. So what I do is I make sure that my game window is set in 16:9 because that's my target. And on my canvas, I want to choose, for this canvas scaler, I want to make sure I choose scale with screen size. And this will help deal with lots of weird UI issues before they happen. Now, what is my reference resolution? That's going to be like the main resolution I'm trying to support, and everything will be scaled based on it. Well, 800 by 600 is a 4:3 resolution. I don't want that. That's like, I don't know, it's not common. Excuse me. What is common is sort of like quote unquote HD, which is 1920 pixels on the X axis, or pixels wide, and then 1080 on the Y axis, or so it's 1080 pixels tall. Um, this will be my reference resolution, and that's a 16 by 9 aspect ratio. So even if you have like a 4K monitor, it's just going to be sort of multiplying this by a constant number, so everything will sort of scale correctly. So you just want to set this scale with screen size and plug in 1920 by 1080 before we make a lot of UI, because if we were to change it later, it will sort of change the way all of our UI that we've already built looks, and it'll be very frustrating. So you want to do this first. All right. So now that I got my scaler set up and I got my canvas, I'm going to add, so I right click on my canvas so I know where this new thing is coming in. I'm going to add a panel. And a panel is just like a big rectangle that we can put more UI elements on. And by default, it does have a visual representation. It's this somewhat transparent gray background. And if you look really, really carefully, as in zoom in really, really closely, you can see that it doesn't have like a hard corner to it. It's a rounded corner. So, and it has a little bit of a black outline even, and so it's not going all the way to the edge. So even though by default it kind of seems like it's taking up my whole screen, like when I'm zoomed out here, it appears that I have this giant gray rectangle. You will notice if you look carefully that it does have a black edge to it, and there is a rounded corner, which is really hard to see, but it's there, and you'll see it, I promise you, in the real game. So when I look at my mock-up that I'm trying to match, there's no rounded corners here. So I want to actually get rid of this background source image that's using. Because if I delete this, it will just, you can see it easier in this view, I guess. So watch what happens if I delete this background source image. I just hit the backspace key or the delete key to see, so it says none now. Now it is just completely filling up the rectangle with the solid color that I've chosen here. So because my mockup doesn't have rounded corners, I'm going to delete that so that my UI in my game doesn't have rounded corners, I'm sorry. Getting ahead of myself, because the next thing I want to do is figure out what the heck color is this. My UI needs to be this color. So let's think about how to deal with that. Again, if it were a professional project, I would ask the artist or whoever gave me this mock-up, I'd say, hey, what color is this? And then I could just easily plug it in. We don't have necessarily that luxury, and you won't always, so it's good to be able to deal with it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just get a screenshot tool. So you can use the snipping tool, or I really like a thing called Green Shot. It's open source. But I'm just going to use the default Windows snipping tool. You can get to it if you just hit the Windows key and type snip. Anyway, if you're on Mac, I think it's Command Shift 4 or 3 or something is the hotkey to take a screenshot. Just Google it. Anyhow, now I have this thing. I'm going to save this as a PNG. Sure, I'll save it here. That's fine. And I'm going to open that in Photoshop so that I can figure out what color stuff is. So just go to open. This was in pictures, and there it is. So here we go. This is not to scale again, so I can't do things like use the ruler tool and measure really effectively. That's not going to be super useful. But the colors are accurate. So what I can do is I clicked the color here to get the eyedropper, and I'm just gonna use the left click again on this color and see now I have the color selected, but the important part here is the hex color. So I'm going to copy this little hex code that represents this brownish color, and I'm going to go back to Unity, and over here where we have our color in our panel, I'm going to click and it'll bring up a similar kind of interface, and I'm going to select the hexadecimal spot and just paste in the code that I had selected. Now this looks a little different, and mainly it's because it's transparent. If I look at our mockup, this is not meant to be transparent. So, at least I don't think. It says underneath, well, I don't know. I don't think it's meant to be transparent. At the end of the day, I suppose we can be flexible and adjust it, but the way I interpret this underneath is transparent overlay. I think that means like the parts that aren't this menu. So it says this menu is taking up 50% of the width. So I think the other 50% is a transparent overlay. But we'll figure that out later. But for now, I want this thing to look just like the mockup. So I have to adjust the alpha to be fully, so if I went all the way to the left, it's invisible or fully transparent. All the way to the right, totally solid or totally opaque. So I want to go all the way to the right and make this fully opaque, and now it should look pretty similar color wise to that guy. So now if we look at our game window, here's our awesome menu so far.